Hello and welcome in once again to the most accurate podcast here at 4 for 4 Fantasy Football. I am Matt Okada. I am here with John Paulson once again. It is Friday, the 1st of November. That's right, we've reached November somehow. Any Halloween candy hangovers on your end, John?
Always. I mean, it's a tough time to be trying to lose weight around the holidays. You got these little candies sitting there I work from home, so they're always there staring
Ooh,
at me. And then you also get into Thanksgiving afterward, and then Christmas. It's a tough time of year to try to stay in shape.
it really is. But it is a good type of year or time of year to eat delicious things for about 2 months straight and kind of
True.
have an excuse. I was gonna say, speaking of delicious things, Thursday Night Football, but it really wasn't that good unless you didn't show up for until the second half, in which case it was actually an amazing game. Jets and Texans. The Jets won 21-13, which interestingly enough, Vegas was on. A lot of people were questioning the line quite a bit coming into the game because the Jets were favored very slightly. They ended up winning. The first half was a disaster. Nobody was doing anything except for Joe Mixon, who was good all game. And then in the second half, both teams just suddenly figured it out, I guess. And the Jets a little bit more. So Aaron Rodgers, who was absolutely awful to start the game, finished with 211 yards and 3 passing touchdowns, 2 of which went to Garrett Wilson, 1 of which went to Davante Adams. Both those guys ended up with really good, really solid days on heavy usage. 90 were 91 yards each, those touchdowns. And Brees Hall was okay, kind of what he's been all year, really, which is, well, he was pretty good, but he wasn't the guy we drafted second or third of the running back position. And so we're still kind of disappointed. On the Jet side of the ball, especially given how long it took to happen, how are you feeling about this offense, about these two receivers, about Brees? What do we expect moving forward? Can we expect anything consistent?
Yeah, I wasn't tracking the line ahead of time, but it makes sense to me that they would have been favored a little bit because of all the injuries that the Texans had at receiver. I mean, they're down to excuse me, Tank Dell, Robert Woods, etc. At receiver. So it does make. And then CJ Stroud just kind of stinks on the road. He's got Jared Goff type splits
Oh,
home and away. Just FYI, anybody out there who's got him this year. Brees Hall, 15 carries. I think the good news for Brees Hall coming out of this is that he was sort of back in the driver's seat, like the clear, you know, bell cow type role. I mean, Braylon Allen only got 4 carries, and Brees Hall and finished with 17 touches. So he didn't find the end zone. I think the thing coming out of this for the passing game is that you've got Davante Adams with 11 targets, Garrett Wilson with 10, and the next highest is Hall with 4, and then no other pass catcher has more than 2 targets. So it's pretty clear that Rodgers is just going to target Adams and Wilson. Lazard is on IR with a weird chest injury. Apparently, we don't know when he'll be back. So it's sort of the seas are parting for both Adams and Wilson to see double-digit targets, moving forward, which is good for them.
it also looks very likely that Mike Williams will get traded. He did next to nothing in this game. I saw a report that he was being heavily connected to the Steelers, but so has every other trade candidate wide receiver this season and off season. And none of them have panned out for Pittsburgh. So maybe that makes them even more likely because they are finally going to get one. But that's something to monitor. Also, he kind of would work well with Russell Wilson, who loves throwing these deep ball, moon ball, Russell Wilson balls. Though he already has that in George Pickens. So we'll see. On the Texans side of the ball, it really just was the Joe Mixon show. He has been amazing this year. He looks amazing. He's running incredibly well. He's putting up fantasy numbers on a weekly basis. 24 carries, 106 rushing yards, and a touchdown in this one. I I mean, you got Derrick Henry. I think he's number 1. Is Joe Mixon RB2?
I mean, he's up there. He's getting the bell cow touches. There's only so many, bell cow 20+ touch type running backs. I've got Mixon at 5. Henry, Barkley, Kyron Williams, Bijan Robinson. I think, after Henry and Barkley, you could probably make a case for Mixon, and you could probably make a case for Mixon ahead of Barkley. He scored more fantasy points this year. Even heading into last night, he averaged 19.6 fantasy points. Maybe he got a little bit of a knock because of, he's already been injured. But yeah, certainly, you love that sort of touch floor with him in this offense. Tank Dell, I wanted to just point his game out: 6 for 126, 9 targets. The next highest target earner was Dalton Schultz with 6. This is the type of game that we were hoping for as Tank Dell managers, especially in a game with Nico Collins out and Stephon Diggs now out for the year. Dell needs to have a real strong second half of the season. I think he will.
Yeah, the Nico Collins this week was his last week of the required 4 to miss for his IR stint, and an initial report said that he would just miss the minimum. So he could be back next week. Just keep your ear to the ground on that. He should be back next week. But as we remember from last year, Tank Dell was often very good when one of the top 3 was missing and he was the 2. So this could still be a great, rest of season stretch for Tank Dell. Also, if you're hoping for Dalton Schultz to be good with the absence of other target earners, he got some targets, but it was not great. 3 catches for 21 yards. He really can't be relied on. And CJ Stroud, like you pointed out, he has not been consistent this year for fantasy, except that it's just been he's consistently bad on the road and consistently good at home, which is nice. And he's actually more consistent in that way than Jared Goff has been this year.
Yes.
So he's the new Jared Goff. Just follow the location and play accordingly. It seems like, more or less. I think that's pretty much it from these crews. If Aaron Rodgers is going to throw 3 touchdowns a game, you're going to like him. But obviously, that's a tall ask. With Adams and Wilson is a really nice duo now, with both of them seeming to come together. It's also worth noting, and I don't know how much of this is applicable, but the way they started this game was so ugly. Like, every pass Davante Adams or Aaron Rodgers threw, especially to Davante Adams, was just going wide or falling out of everyone's hands. And then they all started to seem to click towards the end of the game. I do wonder if it's like it's been a slow burn to get everyone on the same page, and it maybe kicked into gear towards the end of this game and things look better moving forward. So that's something to watch. Ended up being a decent game. All right. That is Thursday Night Football. An interesting one. Let's get to some news. We'll start it off with what has been the hottest piece of news of this past week, at least in terms of what everybody's been talking about, and that has been the Colts benching Anthony Richardson to switch to Joe Flacco for the foreseeable future. Now, obviously, Anthony Richardson was playing horribly. I think that it sometimes goes underreported in the Talking Heads discussions this week just how bad he has been. There's been a lot of comparisons to other quarterbacks who started off not that well, like Josh Allen. And, if you had benched those guys, what would have happened? Well, they were not playing great, but they weren't playing as bad as Anthony Richardson. He was playing on Tim Tebow levels of terrible. Even Tim Tebow's numbers were better. I made that comparison a couple times. And then there was this thing also the injuries, of course, but then there was this thing last week where he took himself out of the game on a play where he said he was tired or something like that. All in all, a weird situation. John, your thoughts generally, if you wish, but then primarily, what does this mean for fantasy purposes? Because it means pretty significant difference for obviously the quarterback position, but then the rest of the team and the pass catchers.
Well, certainly it's a blow for Richardson managers who are counting on him to have a good, strong second half. But the nice thing about it is that usually quarterback's a onesie position, and you can stream or figure it out. You could even pick up Flacco, in many cases. So with that being said, it's a huge shift for this offense now. going from a very run heavy approach, which they might try to, still run the ball, but Flacco ends up throwing 38, 40 passes pretty regularly, and he's competent and, not elite as we used to say. But he's competent, 6.9 yards per attempt, career. So it's nothing special, but with that sort of volume and he does throw touchdowns. This is a good thing for all these receivers, especially Josh Downs. He has 23 catches with Flacco throwing the ball for 206 yards and 2 touchdowns, and that's in like 2.8 games that Flacco has played. He came in for about 80% of snaps and then started twice. That's a 26.9 target share, which is really high, obviously. So I've got him in the top 20 this week. He's got a little bit of a toe injury. He was back at practice, I think, yesterday. It's good for Pittman. Pittman's struggling with a back injury, not moving very well. So I worry about him a little bit. He's more of a wide receiver 3, wide receiver 4 until he starts to, really look healthy and have a big game. But more targets is better for him as well. Like just more pass attempts, a bigger passing pie. And then Alec Pierce, 15.9 yards per target from Flacco. Not a heavily targeted guy, but a deep ball guy. And we know that Flacco could throw the deep ball. So Pierce is an interesting wide receiver 4, wide receiver 5 type dart throw on a weekly basis based on the matchup. And I think they all have a good matchup this week against Minnesota, 30th in adjusted fantasy points allowed to the position. So I've got them all written up in sneaky starts this week.
For listeners who are maybe looking to make like trade deadline moves to acquire these guys, you sort of hit on where the others should be down the stretch. But I'm really curious, and I'm mainly curious like how you handle things like this when you're figuring out your rest of season stuff. This is such a big shift, particularly for Josh Downs. Where does Josh Downs end up for you, and how quickly could he climb higher than that in terms of rest of season wide receiver rankings?
Well, we don't know that this is a permanent, move to Flacco. So you have to, if he has a couple of tough games, they might go back to Richardson, or if they fall out of playoff contention, they might go back to Richardson to, give him a rest of the season evaluation based, to figure out if they want to keep him as their starter or, treat him as their franchise quarterback next year. So that's kind of baked in. You're not like, it's not like it's an end of season injury. I've got Downs at wide receiver 31 right now. He's right below Jalen Waddle and Ladd McConkey and Jamison Williams, and ahead of Tank Dell and DeAndre Hopkins and Zay Flowers. So that's sort of the group he's in. And if he continues to see 27% target share, he'll probably be moving up from there. I mean, like I said, I got him ranked in the top 20 this week.
Pretty good stuff. If you've got Josh Downs, pretty tradable for if he's somewhere else than the guy who hasn't doesn't realize what they've got. All right. The other biggest piece of news in terms of movement around the NFL this past week was Diontae Johnson being traded to the Ravens. Pretty out of nowhere, just in terms of where he went. There was some talk that Diontae Johnson would get traded because the Panthers season was basically over, obviously, from the start. And he's a good wide receiver 2/1 that could help a contending team. But the Ravens hadn't really been, hit on that much. Zay Flowers had been playing really well. Rashad Bateman had started playing well. But all of a sudden, they just went out and nabbed Diontae Johnson for basically nothing. And I have seen in the fallout of this basically every theory about what's going to happen in that receiver room. Diontae Johnson's so good, he's going to be a PPR stud, and that means it's going to hurt everybody else. Or no, Zay Flowers and Rashad Bateman are locked in as a 1 and 2. Diontae Johnson's going to be a distant 3. He's going to return punts, and that's really all they traded him for, which is, by the way, something that was mentioned. Where do you fall on Diontae in Baltimore? And then I'd also be curious whether you think there's any value in Carolina in his wake.
Yeah, the team that probably needed him the most were the Steelers, but we figured he probably wouldn't go back there
Nope.
or end up back there. But he would be a really good fit right now with them. Yeah, this is one where I'm like, okay, this is not necessarily a clear cut. Oh, this is good for this player. This is bad for this player type of a situation, because you've already have a semi-alpha in Zay Flowers, at least, within the target share in that offense. He seems to be the alpha. I'm not sold that he is as good as Diontae Johnson is right now. but he's pretty good. And, Mark Andrews is coming on. He's had 4 good games in a row. And then they've got Rashad Bateman, of course. So Bateman's probably the one that takes the biggest hit in terms of, potential targets and upside and, playing time. Flowers could take a hit in terms of his target upside as well. I don't know how this is going to shake out on a weekly basis. It's hard for a player just to be traded midseason and then immediately, usurp a Zay Flowers type player. So he might come in, and I know he was already injured, but it looks like he's back at practice, or at least feeling better, like Devontae Adams did when he got traded.
Yeah.
And they're talking about using him on punts. But I think this is a 1A, 1B type situation, and we just have to kind of wait and see how it shakes out. It's not clear, like, oh yeah, you should go trade for Diontae. His value probably is taking a slight hit because of the target floor, even though he's got a better quarterback now with Lamar Jackson. I mean, they're throwing the ball quite a bit as well. They started off really run heavy, but lately they've been throwing the ball considerably more. So that's where we're at, and it's just kind of a wait and see whether or not you want to even trust him this week. I don't know. You could certainly start Flowers. Diontae is another story. You just don't know how many snaps he's going to play, in his first game.
At this point, has to probably be said this is the best crew Lamar Jackson has ever had, and he's been amazing already. Is he your QB1 rest of the season?
Yeah. I had to check, but yeah, I mean, you asked me these questions, and I don't have my rest of season rankings memorized because I don't spend a lot of time going, oh, am I going to trade Lamar Jackson for Josh Allen? I mean, but yes, he is my number one. He's 25.3 fantasy points per game. He's been clearly ahead of Hurts and Allen and Jaden Daniels so far. So yeah, he's just been on fire, and I've got him in 3 leagues, so it's been fun.
Nice. Well, Scott Fishbowl is one of those, I believe.
Yes,
I mean, Jaden Daniels, if I remember correctly. That's a pretty nice start at this point.
Jordan Love in that one.
Oh, Jordan Love. Okay, well, that's still pretty
Lamar.
decent if he's
good.
healthy. Okay. Other few bits of news. So we mentioned Stephon Diggs out. So hitting on that briefly, is a torn ACL for Diggs. That is obviously really tough. He was playing well. Probably won't be back. Maybe we'll be back for the start of next season. It's often the case that when it happens mid-season like this, it can spill into the season a little bit. But he will be out. We touched on Tank Dell playing much better. Nico Collins hopefully will be back this next week. So that's the fallout there. TJ Hockenson should be ready to play this week. This is up here in the general news as opposed to the typical injury news because it's about the return here. It's not a week-to-week sort of thing. Still TBD. We don't know for sure that he will play, but that was always the goal for the Vikings, and it looks like we're on track to get that. I imagine you don't want to start him right out of the gate. Does he crack your top 12 right out of the gate if he plays this week? I mean, with the way this position is, it's not that hard to crack the top 12. But
yeah, he's fringe. He's at 13. So I've got Kincaid at 11, Andrews at 12, Hockenson at 13.
Okay.
Yeah, I wouldn't expect him to play 90% of the snaps, but he should be in there 50 to 70, and he'll certainly be in there, I would expect, during red zone situations. So he could have a good fantasy game his first week out.
Yeah. Obviously, we're looking to see him back, and once we see a week under his belt, then you've got very likely a high-end tight end 1 rest of season. If Darnold connects with him the same way that Cousins always did, which Darnold's been playing well. Hopefully we can see the same sort of thing. Last bit of general news, Christian McCaffrey, and this is all with a large grain of salt because there has not been very much clear reporting here, but Christian McCaffrey looks to be on pace to return in week 10 against the Bucks. Again, this has been all somewhat vague. We haven't really gotten super clear stuff. They're on their bye this week, and the reporting was, they would go at it hard in practice with Christian McCaffrey, and he hopefully would make it through those practices and be good to go week 10. Because they're on their bye, we're not going to get any super, super clear information. There's not like a formal injury report to look at. So this will be a next week watch and see kind of thing. But let's assume he's back in week 10. Also worth noting, Jordan Mason has been dealing with this shoulder injury, this AC joint thing on and off. has kept leaving games because of it. It's been very frustrating. But let's assume CMC is back, and let's assume for now that Jordan Mason is good to go. I am curious what your expectation is going to be, both immediately and then down the stretch for this running back room, given what we've known from CMC his whole career, but then now the addition of a strong running back behind who has shown out very well for San Fran. Do you think that this hurts him at all? What's your takeaway? What are your expectations?
Well, I think they're probably going to be pragmatic with McCaffrey, given the way that Mason has played, and Mason has done just as well as like Elijah Mitchell did a couple years ago when he was seeing 8 to 12 carries, and we were actually worried about heading into last season whether or not McCaffrey was going to see that bell cow role. And all indications from the previous season was that Mitchell was going to be very involved, and that kind of knocked McCaffrey down from overall RB1, in some cases a little bit lower because you're just looking at his overall volume not being that high. But as it turned out, they just decided to give him basically every touch when he was healthy. I think that coming out of this whole stretch, they would be wise to, put him in the lead role and then, give him regular breathers with a very capable Mason coming in if he's healthy, or even Guerrero can spell him. And, keep him in that 15 to 20 touch range as opposed to going over 20 touches every game, so that you have this really excellent player for the playoffs, and keep him healthy as you ramp him up, because he's not going to be in complete football shape after this long of a layoff.
Yeah. Is worth noting, while that is I think the smart and optimistic approach, it is worth noting the Niners are not the playoff lock that they usually are at this time of year. It feels like they are 4-4, and their division has been pretty competitive, all things considered. A lot of teams right around that same mark. And with Jordan Mason banged up, there's also maybe some hope that you need to let, or some thought that you need to let him rest up and get healthy as well. So a lot of complexity here. Shanahan has always been a guy who, feeds that one guy, and then if he goes down, there's another one behind him who's really good. We'll see how that pans out now with CMC coming off the injury and with Mason playing as well as he did. Really interesting situation to watch. If they're both back healthy, let me just ask it this way generally, and I don't know if your rest of season rankings matter to this yet, but I'm curious. Just where does CMC fall? Because obviously he was drafted to be number 1. I doubt that he'll be there for you, but where would he slot in if he's healthy rest of season starting week?
Well, right now he's at RB13. That assumes that he might be back after the bye. I mean, we just don't know, like, he's going to be back. So I don't want you trading, away a good player like Devon Achane or Alvin Kamara or, Jonathan Taylor right now for him, unless you really are rolling the dice and think he'll be back. Because until we get him on the field for some limited and some full practices, and we get into a game situation where he's active, we just don't know. He could be out 3 more weeks or something. So
yep,
that's where we're at with that. I don't want to go too aggressive trying to trade for him, although he does. I mean, and again, like I said, I don't know what the workload's going to be like. I'm not expecting RB1 overall touches from him rest of season. He could certainly be ranked in the top 10, top 5 on a weekly basis because of his effectiveness, but Mason might be very involved.
Also, to your point of feeling confident about when he'll be back, the reporting at the start of this year and how transparent Shanahan and the 49ers were leaves zero trust in what to expect out of them, because we just weren't given anything on what McCaffrey was dealing with coming into the season. So it's a weird one. It's a complicated one. Obviously, you drafted Christian McCaffrey number 1 overall, and you really want him back, but we're gonna have to keep our ears and eyes open and react accordingly to as far as where he ends up and how he plays rest of the season. All right, that's the end of the complicated, strange news. We will get into the injuries, the week-to-week injuries that are a little more clear-cut. But before we do, we have a quick read from our sponsor and Past John. So here's that.
Hey everyone, John Paulson here. We know there are a ton of options out there for real money sports action, but we have found one that really stands out from the rest. Prize Picks. With over 10 million members and billions of dollars in award winnings, Prize Picks has made daily fantasy sports accessible to everyone. It's easy to play, and now you can win up to 100 times your money on Prize Picks with as few as 4 correct picks. Prize Picks is also the only real money daily fantasy platform with an injury insurance policy. They call it the Reboot. So your lineups stay in play even if one of your players gets injured. If you sign up today, you'll get $50 instantly when you play $5, and that $50 bonus is guaranteed whether you win or not. PrizePicks is the best way to win real money this football season. Which players are going off, which ones aren't. Make your picks in less than 60 seconds and turn your sports opinions into real money all season long on PrizePicks. I play PrizePicks weekly, and I'll have a couple of my favorite plays for you after the break. So download the app today and use TMAP, TMAP, to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Again, just download the PrizePick app. Use the promo code TMAP, TMAP, to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. PrizePicks, run your game.
Beauty.
Wow.
And if I remember correctly, John, both of your picks last week were smashes.
Yes, and I don't do ad reads, but I did this one because I do play PrizePicks on a weekly basis. And everybody loves it. It's a fun game to play. Last week, Barkley more rushing yards and Pickens more receiving yards. Both came in. So let's see if we can keep it going. I've got 2 quarterbacks this week, passing yards. Both of these players were sneaky starts. I alluded to one earlier, Mr. Joe Flacco, more than 234.5 passing yards. I think the number's really low. Vikings defense is legit, but they are a pass funnel. They're better against the run and have had the most pass attempts per game allowed, 41.3 this season. So Flacco should see plenty of volume. He's obviously got a good receiving core. Minnesota's averaging 284 yards passing allowed to every quarterback since week 4 has cleared this number. Flacco missed this number in his last start, but in his 6 previous starts going back to Cleveland last year, he has cleared it easily. So I think he clears it in this one. This is a sneaky shootout, this game, in my opinion. My other pick is another quarterback facing an even bigger pass funnel. Bo Nix faces the Ravens, and I think he'll throw for more than 214.5 passing yards. He's cleared it on his own, just Bo Nix, the rookie, in 4 of 8 games. So it's not an outlandish line just from, a neutral matchup, but the Ravens have yielded at least 269 passing yards in 7 of their 8 games and are allowing 312 yards passing on average to opposing quarterbacks. They are only allowing 70 yards rushing on 3.3 yards per carry. So opponents wisely throw the ball since Baltimore is yielding 8.1 yards per attempt. So more for Nix and more for Flacco.
I might have to quit my job at the NFL, which prevents me from betting, in order to smash that Bo Nix line. Oh my gosh. That is such a incredibly good pick. I actually wrote some of this up this past week. The Ravens have allowed the most passing yards in the NFL and the fewest rushing yards. They are the absolute definition of a pass funnel. That is such an easy line. Smash pick. Love that. Okay. Somebody, please, who is listening, go and play Prize Picks on my behalf so that you can enjoy the benefits of this where I can. All right, let's get into these injuries. Jordan Love has a realistic chance to play with his groin injury. Was limited in practice Thursday. Have not yet seen a Friday practice report or a final injury report. Maybe that'll pop up as we speak. But for now, it looks like a realistic chance to play. He's pushing to play. That makes a huge difference to everybody on that team, obviously. We know what we expect. Well, we know what we hope to expect from the pass catchers. Who does what in a given week is a little tougher. If he plays, are you confident rolling him out there against the Lions?
Yeah, this is yes, I would be. I think you could start him. There's definitely a chance for re-injury. It's also supposed to rain, which is not ideal. I think if this was any other team, any other game, really, I don't think that the Packers would play him in this, but he's probably pushing to play so much because it's the Lions and it's for first place. And if he feels like he can give it a go, he'll try, but I don't know if they'll let him because they've got the bye next week. And if they didn't have a bye next week, that would change things as well. But they could literally give him 2 weeks of rest. Go try to win this game with Malik Willis, who is 2-0 already as a starter. Closed out the game last week, making them 3-0. Maybe they can beat the Lions with Malik Willis. It's not unheard of at home. Jared Goff on the road, not as good as he is at home. And kind of wet, kind of ugly conditions, maybe. But it just seems like he's angling to play. I've got him in the rankings right now. The issue that is going to cause some headaches is that they play late. They're in the afternoon slate. So if you want to wait on Love, you better have a backup plan in place in the late window, or Monday night football or Sunday night football. My thinking is that just the way that they go, they're very conservative, the Packers, with injuries. I think they end up not playing them. But I have them in the rankings because everybody would be asking me, where would Jordan Love be if he plays? Yep. So that's where we're at.
It's worth throwing back a little bit to week 4. If you remember, he had been injured. They'd been playing Malik Willis. He had actually been winning them games. And then they were facing the Vikings in week 4 in what was a game for first place, or a game that would have a huge impact on first place. That was when the Vikings were 4-0, looking incredible. And they played Jordan Love because I think largely because of that divisional importance. He threw the ball 54 times, had 389 yards and 4 touchdowns and 3 interceptions. So it was a little mixed. They just barely lost that game. But I think, to all the points you laid out in terms of, the importance of this, they will be very much, or he at least will be very much, gunning to play. And I think that they will probably have to allow him to do so, because Malik Willis has played well, but I think it's tough to say that they're going to beat the Lions with Malik Willis, because the Lions have been amazing. Still a chance, but I think they try to get Jordan Love out there. Jonathan Brooks is a full practice as of yesterday. That I believe was his first full practice. Or maybe he fully practiced Wednesday as well. But this week has been his first week of full practice, coming back from the ACL injury, of course. There's been a lot of hoopla about what he'll do when he finally gets back. We've all been waiting. It's been stashed away on many, many benches. Chuba Hubbard been playing well, of course. The Panthers' season is essentially tossed into the trash already, so that makes things a little more complicated. What's your expectations for Brooks this week, assuming he plays, and then moving forward?
Well, I don't know. I know you've been a cheerleader for Brooks all off season and in season, like waiting for this to happen.
I liked it better when he was supposed to just miss 1 month, but yes.
And when Chuba wasn't doing really well, yeah. But the last couple of games, Chuba 17 for 52 and a touchdown against Washington, 3.1 yards per carry, 15 for 56 against Denver, 3.7 yards per carry. So after a really good run where he had not gone below 5 yards per carry in 5 straight games, he has now gone back to back under 4. And there is an opening here if Carolina wanted to start to shift to Brooks and see. But if you watch the press conference with Dave Canales about somebody asked him, is it possible he doesn't play this year? And he's just like, yeah. So like he could play this week, or he could not play the rest of the year. That doesn't sound like too positive in terms of, what's his outlook. Like, why would he even, well, you should say, oh, we anticipate him being out here at some point. But maybe he didn't want to even give a proper answer to the question, or maybe that's it. Maybe that answer is the correct answer. It's possible they're not good. So if they're going to be super, super careful with him, they've written off the season. They don't want to risk it, him in any sort of big role, then it's not going to be useful for fantasy. I mean, my thinking is that they probably run the string out with Hubbard if he's doing okay, and as the lead back, and perhaps Brooks, as when he gets healthy, takes over the Miles Sanders role and is in there for every third series and gets his feet wet. That's not going to be good for fantasy for you or for any of the Brooks managers out there. But, the thought of him coming in and taking over the Hubbard role and getting 15 plus carries, 3 catches or something rest of the season doesn't seem like the likely result of this right now, if that makes sense.
My very glass 3/4 full perspective on this is that he would be the only thing worth watching in Carolina, and that he plays well enough in limited touches that you just can't bench him for Chuba Hubbard, and they have to give him work for some hope for fans. That's very rosy outlook. So I don't really expect it. That's not my smart fantasy analyst hat. I've drafted a lot of Jonathan Brooks, and
You're
he's
coping.
good. Yes, I am coping. That is the definition of coping. All right. Rico Dowdle is practicing full. He missed week 8 with an illness. He should be back. What does that mean for the Dallas backfield? I do not know. Obviously, they activated Dalvin Cook last week with Dowdle out. That didn't look good. Zeke hasn't looked good. Dowdle hasn't looked as good of late. He was getting more touches than anybody else for a while there. But are you interested in anything here? Or is it a full avoid?
Well, I think Dowdle's a competent RB3, spot starter because he's the lead back, or he has been the lead back. I don't think that the fact that he sat out with an illness is going to change that. So he's coming back to his same role, in my opinion. I did see a report or a rumor that if he had been able to play, that Ezekiel Elliott would be a healthy scratch, which I thought was an interesting rumor. But I don't know where that came from. I just saw it come by on the Twitter, which is not as reliable as it used to be. And then Dalvin Cook didn't do anything. So, I think we're pretty much status quo. They might, they decide they'll be active, will be the backup to Dowdle.
In Tampa Bay, Bucky Irving, it was reported just this week, is dealing with a toe injury that is, quote, likely to linger all year. Not great news to hear if you were a Bucky Irving pickup. Maybe good news to hear if you are relying on Rachaad White. Also, if you're hoping for a Sean Tucker resurgence after that 1 week of excellence. For this weekend moving forward, I think the main takeaway here is how high are you in Rachaad White, and how much does this hurt your perspective on Bucky Irving, if at all?
Well, if he's playing through it, our injury index says it's about a 13% drop. It's if assuming turf toe.
Yep.
We don't know exactly what it is. Probably something like that.
Yeah.
This is a bad matchup against the Chiefs. They're first in the league in adjusted fantasy points allowed to running backs. So I've got White and Irving in the 30s, 31, 34 respectively. Tucker probably not. Seems like he's the odd one out right now. He's the third one to get, even though he might be the most explosive back right now with Irving kind of gimpy. He's not getting a whole lot of work, but that could change in any given week. The thing about Rachaad White that's good is that he does catch passes, and they are short on pass catchers right now.
In what sounds like a savior move for New Orleans, although I believe I saw a quote that Derek Carr specifically said he is not a savior. Derek Carr has returned to practice this week from that oblique injury that has kept him out for a while now. They were in absolute shambles with Spencer Rattler and/or Jeff, I believe it is, Hainer. The fact that I still can't remember his first name tells you something about what he's done. This is obviously huge for the offense in general because everybody has honestly been struggling without him there. I think the biggest question mark, or the biggest question, is when he returns, which it sounds like he will. A, how close does this offense get back to what we saw in the first couple weeks where we were like blown away praising Clint Kubiak? And B, with Rashid Shaheed now out, we have not seen Olave without Shaheed, but with Carr at quarterback. How high does Olave climb for you? Does he get up near that wide receiver 1 range where he was drafted to be and had kind of been disappointing?
Well, those of us on the stream, I was doing my crazy Derek Carr stare at the camera like he does so often, or just stare off into the distance there. This guy knows when to come back. Like they're facing the Panthers this week. This is the time you get back in the lineup. You look, you're functional. You look great. Again, there's a lot on the line though. If they don't win, and he looks like it, it looks pretty bad. It was actually Jake Hainer. Just wanted to touch on that.
Oh,
Jake
see,
Hainer
there you go.
Correct answer. This is great for Olave. I've got him ranked as a low end wide receiver 1 this week, given all the injuries to the receiving core there. This is great for Alvin Kamara. He's back in the top 5. And I think even Taysom Hill is a sneaky start this week. He ran 21 routes last week, which was the most all year. And against Carolina, he could make some hay in the running game. They're pretty bad against the run. I wouldn't be surprised if he scored a touchdown and had 30 or 40 yards rushing to boot. So I don't know that we're going to get back to the first 2 weeks where we thought the Saints were an offensive juggernaut. I think they played the Panthers in the first week, and then
And
it
Cowboys
was the
in week 2.
Cowboys. So
Yep.
they blew out the Cowboys, and we were all really impressed. But apparently
Yep.
the Cowboys defense is not anywhere near where it was
Nope.
last year, the year before. So, Carr was in the lineup for several games after that, and they didn't do very well. So I don't know if this is ever going to get back to that 40-point plus game. But this is a good matchup here against the Panthers. So I think all these guys should deliver, and I think Carr is actually a decent start himself.
Puka Nacua popped back up in the injury report with a knee injury in practice this week. I saw a report just before we got on that said it is not considered serious, which thank goodness, because it was in the same knee as the knee injury that he had been dealing with. It still doesn't feel great here because goodness gracious, can Puka Nacua stay healthy for more than a 2-game stretch? TBD. If it's not serious, we shouldn't have to worry too much about him being out for a long period of time. But just keep an eye on it. Keep an eye on the final injury report for this week. Obviously, you're playing him if he's active. And if he's not, Cooper Kupp becomes a top, what, for you, 6, 10 wide receiver?
Yeah, he was sitting at I think 12 or 11 with Puka at like 7 or 8. But then this news broke before yesterday's game, and I wanted to react to it because, before the kickoff for the Jets game, you have 3 players that you could legitimately start over Puka Nacua if he's going to be injured or out. Devontae Adams, Garrett Wilson, and Tank Dell. So I went over to our handy dandy 4for4 injury index, which basically, if you haven't seen it, just search that phrase. And Adam Hutchinson, who used to work for us, it was before that, it was Chris Raybon, who got this together initially, but Hutchinson updated it for us. It's really useful for me because it basically breaks down every position by every injury and what sort of drop in production you expect based on the injury. And for unspecified knee injury, it's a minus 20%, 21%.
Wow.
So I'm able to just downgrade the player by about that much, and that puts him in a different range in the rankings. And in this case, it put him below Garrett Wilson and Devontae Adams and just right above Dell. So I tweeted out I probably would start, all 3 over him. And thankfully, that all worked out for anybody who followed that advice. Because they all had good games. So Puka, I'm glad to hear that it's not serious. Adjusting the rankings based on that percentage does assume that he's going to play through the knee injury, but it could have been worse where he's out. When you leave practice, it's like, and plus he's had knee problems all year. He could have been just ruled out today and not practiced at all and be out this week. So, that's where the Thursday game really throws a wrench into your lineup decisions and stuff. But the process that we have, or that I have to do that, works out most often. So I'm glad we have that in place.
Beauty. T. Higgins has not practiced this week. It's DNP today as well, I saw, fortunately, before we got on. It's a quad injury that has kept him out. Looks very unlikely that he will play. I don't think you're excited about a tertiary wide receiver there, but does anybody else bump up for you in the pass catching group with Higgins out?
Yeah, we're going sneaky again here, and Mike Gesicki has delivered when, for the most part, when I'm pulling up his game log now. With Higgins sidelined, Higgins missed the first 2 weeks. So it's 3 for 18 and 4 targets in week 1 against the Patriots. Nothing special there, but then 7 for 91 in that game against the Chiefs on 9 targets. And then with Higgins out again last week, 7 for 73 on 8 targets against Philly. And Philly's actually pretty good against the position. They're first in adjusted fantasy points allowed to tight ends. So what we're getting at here in 3 games, Gesicki has seen a 20.6 target share, 6.5 per game, 5 catches, 54 yards, 55 yards receiving on average. And in the last 2, it's been even better than those numbers. So I did pick him up in Scott Fishbowl as a possible start this week. I'm reeling from my Xavier Gipson goose egg, my returner goose egg. What, he didn't get 1 return or 1 catch.
Come on, Gibson.
Yeah, in a good matchup too. Houston did not kick to him, or he had a lot of fair catches, I guess, last night. I searched his name, and a bunch of people were complaining about all the fair catches he was taking. But I digress. I picked him up in an FFPC league as well. Mike Gesicki has a possible start this week, and looks like it's going to pay off. I thought Higgins might play this week after having last week off, but it's looking pretty doubtful.
Yeah. Over in Buffalo, Amari Cooper with a wrist injury and Curtis Samuel with a pec injury are both questionable to play this week. That's one we are really going to need to watch the final injury report and the news going up to Sunday, whether they'll miss or not. It obviously with Curtis Samuel, it doesn't matter all that much, except for the fallout in terms of routes and opportunities for the other guys who were there. If they both missed, Khalil Shakir came back on this past week. Keon Coleman has come back or has come on a little bit more in recent weeks. A lot of people would say, I think Amari Cooper is opening things up for him a little bit. And, you know, he's just the down the field guy, and the trust is building with Josh Allen, and it's working out for him a little bit. I guess just how does the receiver core fall out for you either way, mainly with Cooper, Shakir, and Coleman?
Well, I have Cooper in the rankings right now, but I don't have him ranked as high as last week. I thought he would ramp up from his first week, which was actually pretty impressive how productive he was in that first game with the Bills, but then kind of was a setback or a step back last week, and now he's got this wrist injury. So I've got him at 30. I've got Shakir at 33 and Coleman at 34. So they're all bunched up together. If Cooper were to be out, then I think Shakir and Coleman both get into the low 30s, high 20s as starts. And I think Shakir has for this whole season been pretty productive, whereas Coleman's been more of a late bloomer here. We shall see if he can continue to produce without Cooper drawing a lot of the attention. Kincaid is also will also get a bump if Cooper were to sit. I don't think there's another receiver there that I would have a whole lot of confidence starting in that would step in. You've got Mac Hollins and Curtis Samuel at this point. I wouldn't trust either of them.
Yeah. Tyrone Tracy, with the concussion that he suffered last week, is trending very well. Expected he will actually clear concussion protocol, barring a setback, and play this week, which is a fairly quick concussion protocol turnaround. They play on Sunday morning. So that's great news for him, assuming he is cleared. He has very clearly shown at this point, with Devin Singletary coming back and still holding on to the bell cow, honestly, RB1 role, and looking very good with it. Rest of season expectation for Tyrone Tracy. I don't know if we've actually talked about this, but given after what we saw last week with Singletary back, I'm curious how high you have him and how much you consider him an RB2 moving forward.
Well, yeah, I mean, I consider him the RB1 for the Giants. I think he's supplanted Devin Singletary. He looks more explosive and played very well in the games where he had his opportunities. In the last 4 games, 18 carries, 129 against Seattle, 17 carries for 50 yards and a touchdown, plus 6 catches for 57 yards against Cincy. Had a poor game against Philly, only 9 carries or 9 touches total, but then bounced back against Pittsburgh, 22 touches for 150 yards and a touchdown. That led to a loss for me in Scott Fishbowl. Upset about that, but happy for Tyrone Tracy. I have him ranked at RB 26, like right below Nick Chubb.
Yeah.
You could probably argue that he could be a little higher if you're, sort of assuming he holds on to that job rest of season. The concussion worried me a little bit, I think, when I did rest of season rankings, but it looks like he's bouncing back really quickly. So I put him in the projections yesterday, the day before, since it looks like he's going to play, and he's my RB 25 on the week.
Cool. And then over in Jacksonville, it's a mess. Christian Kirk, I don't know if we've touched on, is out for what sounds like the season, I believe. Travis Etienne is a game time decision with a hamstring injury. Brian Thomas Jr. is a game time decision with the chest injury, although honestly, that's good news that he's reached game time decision status after the initial reports with his injury that sounded like it could be as long as a month. So that's honestly great. Hopefully he plays. Tank Bigsby has been limited in a practice with an ankle injury, but he should play. Gabe Davis is also a game time decision. So it is a hot mess over there. Tough to know what's going on. Tank Bigsby, uh, I think these are the main questions. Well, I'll just throw them both out there, and you tell me how you feel in general. If all these receivers are missing, is Parker Washington of any interest to you? Because he was a waiver wire hype guy for some people, not for me. I'll spill my hand. Is that a phrase? Show my hand? Spill my tea? I don't know. Show my hand early with and saying I don't really believe in him. But with all these injuries, there's some hype around him. And then if ETN comes back, it's very much seemed like Tank Bigsby is just taken over this role, has been a much better player, much better running back. How much does ETN get, and how much does he hurt Bigsby if and when he gets back?
Well, I have moved Bigsby ahead of ETN on the running back depth chart. Not 100% confident that is going to stick because ETN does have a pretty good track history of being a lead back there, but he's injured now and he wasn't as effective as Bigsby was behind the same offensive line in the same offense when they were both playing. So you could definitely see Bigsby in the main running back role with ETN doing the pass catching because that's not Bigsby's forte, although he did get a little bit more work as a receiver last week. He has a tendency to have stolen hands out of the backfield. So I don't have a ton of confidence against the Eagles. As I just mentioned, they shut down Tyrone Tracy a couple weeks ago. They have a pretty good rush defense now. So I've got him ranked as an RB 2-3 type in the 20s. Bigsby, if ETN is back, that also just gives them another option of a player to try at running back, which means he might, Bigsby might not see all the snaps that he saw, but he has, performed really well for the most part in the last month. So I think he has earned the starting role at this point, especially with ETN with a hamstring injury. But complicating things, Bigsby's got his own injury, so we don't know how bad that is. At receiver, I'm surprised that Brian Thomas is trending towards potentially playing. It looked like he was going to be out at least 1 week, but they're down so bad at receiver. I don't know if they're pushing him to play or they're, the heat is on in terms of getting him out there. They're saying he's not going to be 100%. So I've got him ranked as, a not 100% Brian Thomas. He would normally be, top 12 or top 15 at this point. And he's at 24-ish or something like that in half PPR. Christian Kirk done for the year. And then Gabe Davis would probably be the wide receiver 2 if he's healthy. And he's sort of an interesting player if he can get healthy. I don't know if he's going to see the volume. Parker Washington probably sees the biggest uptick in snaps and maybe has more targets than Gabe Davis. But Gabe Davis is as we know, is a touchdown scorer. He's kind of the 3 for 80 for a touchdown if he has a good game. The other sort of interesting thing is if Thomas and Davis both sit, or if Thomas sits, do I believe in Parker Washington? Just, 5 for 50 spot start, you might get a touchdown out of it too, but he's not like some stud that's coming in my opinion, and going to have 180 yards receiving. The interesting play is at tight end, not just Evan Engram, who is a great play, but Brenton Strange is a good sleeper, sneaky start dart throw if you are desperate at the position. He had 5 catches against the Packers, and they seemed to be his snaps really didn't rise, which was interesting because it seemed like he was out there making plays. But I would think that they would play more 12 given the receiver situation and get Strange out there because if Thomas and Davis are both out, Strange is probably the second best receiver after Engram in terms of what they've actually produced this year. So they would be wise to get him on the field more and maybe run those two tight end sets. So that's where we're at with the Jaguars. The tough thing about this is that they play late in the afternoon as well. So a lot of this moving parts will be, you got to make if you want to play Thomas, then you got to, have a backup plan.
Yeah, very murky. All right, let's get into matchups. We will be as speedy as we can on these because we had so much to talk about with all this news, and we still want to get to Q&A, which you can keep dropping in the chat, of course. Game of the week, Cowboys and Falcons has a 51.5 point over-under. This one looks like a ton of fun. The Cowboys defense, as we hit up top, is not what it was in years past. They are 27th in adjusted fantasy points allowed to quarterbacks. They are 29th in that stat to running backs. So both really good opportunities there for the Falcons offense. The Falcons defense has been very strong against running backs, which makes the questionable Cowboys running back situation even more questionable. Rico, Dowdle, as you mentioned, kind of a fringe play. I think I'm most curious about the flex wide receivers like Jalen Tolbert and Darnell Mooney. How interested are you in them and anyone else besides the studs that you're excited about here?
Well, Darnell Mooney is almost a must start at this point. He's like a top 15 fantasy receiver this year. So I definitely like him in this spot. And then Tolbert is more of you kind of have to start him. He's out there for 70, 80% of the snaps, getting third most targets maybe on the team. And he might pop his head up for you in a given week. Certainly had some good games previously in the season. The last couple of games have been a little quieter. But Mooney is nearly a must start certainly in the flex. And then Tolbert is kind of And then as far as like Rico Dowdle, I think he's playable due to his pass catching ability in a game that might be kind of a track meet with two bad pass defenses. So we'll see.
The fate of the week is one of the easiest of the year. It is Patriots and Titans. I don't know if you want to play a single player in this game. The Patriots are 31st in AFPA to running backs, which gets you very excited, except for the fact that Tyjae Spears has a hamstring injury and Tony Pollard has a foot injury and is not practicing, at least not as of Thursday. If neither of these guys plays, it is Julius Chestnut as the RB1, which sounds like a made-up name, but it is indeed a real football player. Are you playing whichever of these guys is healthy and no one else? I mean, I guess Ramondre Stevenson is there.
Yeah, I think you can. I think you can start Ramondre. I've got him just as a volume play. The Tennessee's ninth in adjusted fantasy points allowed to running backs, and he's been, he pops his head up and has a touchdown or two and 15 touches a game. I mean, you could do a lot worse. Pollard came in the top 10 this week with Spears out, and then I've moved him down now with Spears looking like he's going to play into more of a RB1A, RB1B. If they're both kind of banged up, they'll probably split the work or lead back up. How they Spears is a pretty significant backup to Pollard. So both of those guys are. I mean, Pollard I think is certainly playable. Spears less so, but I think Spears is enough of a headache that Pollard's not a no-brainer RB1.
Friday practice report will be big because neither of them practice Thursday. So stay tuned for that in the final injury report. All right, let's get into some positions. Quarterbacks. Patrick Mahomes gets the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. You would maybe question, why is Patrick Mahomes even in here? We know to start Patrick Mahomes. Well, no, we don't, because he's been awful. If you've been listening to this podcast these last couple of weeks, we've hit on it. But the Buccaneers are 31st in AFPA, and he finally was good for fantasy last week. So I think there's some hope there. And then just touched on Kirk Cousins versus the Cowboys. That's a nice one. And you touched on Bo Nix against the Ravens earlier in the prize pick section. So those two we've hit on. Patrick Mahomes, how excited are you to play him if you've been waiting to get some fantasy points out of him?
Yeah, he's on our FFPC team with me and Connor Allen, and we actually benched him last week for Tua, and he outscored Tua because he finally had a good game, and we just kind of felt like that Chiefs Raiders game might be low scoring, and the Raiders not putting up much of a fight, and a couple rushing touchdowns by Kareem Hunt, and then Mahomes doesn't have to do anything, but he ended up with a couple touchdowns. We're definitely starting him this week. Tampa's 31st, as you mentioned. All three of these quarterbacks that you mentioned are in the sneaky starts column if you want some more detail on that. Kyler Murray, I think, is still very playable at home due to his rushing ability. He adds a lot of points by the floor. And I am kind of off of Tua this week at Buffalo. He, tends to do well against mediocre defenses, bad defenses. And then when he faces a good defense, it doesn't do quite as well. His numbers against Buffalo are okay, but, this game at Buffalo, 5th in adjusted fantasy points allowed to quarterbacks. They are a lot easier to run on. They're 25th in adjusted fantasy points allowed to running back. So I'm expecting bigger games from Achane and maybe Raheem Mostert.
The Bears being second does make it tough on Kyler Murray, but worth noting, the Dolphins, who he played last week, are very, very good in AFPA. I believe they might have been first going into that week, and he had a good week there. So one of the better weeks that any quarterback has had against them. And, he's got his legs always, and that helps against these tough matchups. So at the running back position, the Chuba Hubbard / Jonathan Brooks, we'll see what happens there, get the Saints, who are 30th in AFPA and have been very porous against the run. And then the Cincinnati running backs get the Raiders, who are 29th. Chase Brown has been the better play there, but I'm curious if you have any interest in both guys in that one.
Yeah, Hubbard is a play this week. Even if Brooks is active, I don't think we shift over to a backup role for Hubbard in week 1 of the new experiment. So I'm pretty confident that he'll have a good game against New Orleans. Chase Brown was a sneaky start this week. Las Vegas is 29th in adjusted fantasy points allowed to the position. And I think Moss is also playable, although not as excited about him. He is getting some snaps and he could make some noise. But I've got him ranked 32nd and Brown at 21. I think this is a game where Brown could have an RB1 week.
Okay. On the bad side, J.K. Dobbins and the Chargers get the Browns, who are 6th in AFPA. Jonathan Taylor gets the Vikings, who are 3rd. Obviously, you're playing him, but just an expectations note there. And Josh Jacobs gets the Chargers in that same game. Wait, that doesn't make any sense. Something is wrong here.
Josh Jacobs has the Lions, who are 2nd in adjusted fantasy points.
Who are 2nd. Okay, thank you. I just have the wrong tri-code.
No worries.
Josh Jacobs gets the Lions, who are 2nd. Very tough against the run. And the Buccaneers get that Chiefs defense that you hit on a little bit earlier, who are number 1 in AFPA, which makes playing any of them much tougher. What are your takeaways here on the bad matchups, if any?
Well, you're talking about some good players with bad matchups. You're probably still starting them. Dobbins, I would still start, even though it's not a great matchup. Taylor, Jacobs as well. It's these fringe guys where you start to get worried, and these partial backfield types like Bucky Irving or Rachaad White. You get a little bit nervous about them, but Rachaad White, if the Bucs fall behind, could see 6 or 7 catches. So I'm more worried about Bucky Irving in terms of his touch floor against KC than I am with White.
Yeah. They are obviously not favored, the Bucs, against Kansas City in Kansas City, so that definitely does make it more of an interesting White game. Where Irving with the injury as well, and this matchup feels very close to a bench, at least in my book. At the wide receiver position, on the good side, the Colts wide receivers with Joe Flacco at quarterback get the Vikings. You touched on that a little bit earlier. Great matchup for them. Flacco to hit the over on yards means his receivers should hit the overs on yards. So that's exciting for anyone who's been waiting to start those guys, and they've been struggling with Richardson. And then the Broncos wide receivers, both of these 2 teams that I have in the notes were your price picks at quarterback. The Broncos wide receivers get the Ravens, who are last in AFPA. You touched on this with Bo Nix. My main question is, who do you like there? And I assume you like someone because you took the over on Nix's yards. Who do you like there to catch these passes and get the yards?
Well, the over was 213 or something. The more, we should call it.
That helps.
Not the over.
Yep.
More on 213. That's real low there for him. So, it's Cortland Sutton is the only pass catcher that I have any semblance of confidence in. And the Denver, they just seem like they're rotating their receivers, and they're getting enough. Sutton had a goose egg with 0 targets 2 weeks ago and then comes back with a vengeance. So they obviously saw that and wanted to correct it, and he ended up with a big game last week. So I think he is the best bet for a big game this week. I don't think he's an elite receiver at this point in his career, but he's a solid, and certainly in this with this sort of volume that he should be seeing, or that this passing offense should be seeing against Baltimore, because they're very unlikely to be able to run the ball very well. Should be a lot of dropbacks and maybe even some runs for Knicks.
On the bad side, in that same game, the Ravens wide receivers get the Broncos, who are second. Obviously, that incredible secondary for Denver makes it tougher on the now slightly more murky Ravens receiver core. I think you're still starting Zay Flowers, but Bateman and Johnson now, I'm curious to see what you want to do with those guys. The Cardinals wide receivers get the Bears, who are third, probably still starting Marvin Harrison Jr., but those other guys you can flex in good matchups, maybe not so much. And Jalen Waddle, I think you're starting Tyreek Hill with no question. But Jalen Waddle gets the Bills, who are fifth. I'm just curious how high he gets for you. What's your takeaway on those teams?
Well, the good players in bad matchups you're still starting. So as you mentioned, Hill I think is fine. Jay Flowers a little less so. I've got him at wide receiver 20, and just looking at him versus some of those guys below him, a little dicey with him against Patrick Surtain. So a little worried about him, especially if Diontae Johnson plays and they are trying to get him involved. Like there's some different. He's getting attacked on some different sides here with a bad matchup, and then Diontae coming in if he plays. Marvin Harrison, he's, you start him and you hope that it's a good game for him. He's been kind of up and down, but he's showed some dominant games and he's had some really bad games. But I think at home, they'll be okay. He should get a chance or two to make a big play. And then Waddle, he's obviously benefiting from Tua being back. I've got him ranked wide receiver 26, so that's significantly higher than where he was with Tyler Huntley in the 40s, just not having any sort of confidence in the passing game at that point. But he's a really talented player in a bad matchup. You could see him with a big game if they really sell out to try to stop Tyreek Hill, which is difficult to do even for the best defenses.
Very true. And lastly, at tight end, Cade Otton, who in my opinion has become an absolute must-start tight end, faces the Chiefs. They are 23rd. Not particularly incredibly high, but just wanted to throw him in there because he has become basically an every week start unless you've got George Kittle. And if you do, you should probably trade one of them. And then Sam Laporta, who obviously has been very up and down, gets the Packers, who are 31st. So big hopes there for Sam Laporta. You've probably been starting him regardless, but at least you can feel good about it this week. And TJ Hockenson, you mentioned he's 13 for you. Don't know if we want to roll him out right away, but at least in terms of what we can watch him do on the targets he does get or the involvement in the snaps he does get, the Colts are 29th against the position. So that's pretty nice. And then on the bad side, Evan Ingram, the Eagles, you mentioned it, number one against tight ends. So that's tough, but the target share for Evan Ingram makes him very likable anyways. And Tucker Kraft, who has been, like Cade Otton, very nearing must-start status, gets the Lions, who are fourth. I think you have to play him anyways, but generally, your takeaway on the good and the bad here.
Well, I'll just say that talked about the bad first because I'm thinking of it, but Tucker Kraft, his startability depends on whether or not Jordan Love probably is active. I mean, I wouldn't have as much confidence in the passing game. I would have to rerun all the numbers for the Green Bay passing game, assuming Malik Willis is at quarterback, because I would expect a very run-oriented offense with, maybe 60-40 rush. They did sort of unleash Willis a little bit in the second start after he did well in the first start. So there is some hope that he could be at 25 pass attempts or something like that, but more likely it's 20 pass attempts or fewer and like 40 rushes. So that doesn't leave a lot in the passing game for these guys. But Matt LaFleur is great at scheming guys open. And just in general, Tucker Kraft is a rest of season start with Jordan Love active, in my opinion. He's a tight end one. Hockenson, we touched on. I think depending on your situation, you might want to just go ahead and roll him out there because there's not a lot of great options unless you have something else on your bench right now. Otton, we talked about last week, or when we did this whole Jalen McMillan dance, and we talked about how this was all going to shake out. And I said, The one guy that I think is rock solid now is Cade Otton, and that has obviously came to fruition last week with a couple touchdowns. Another good matchup. This is probably the best matchup in the Chiefs defense in terms of positional matchups is the tight end. And I think he'll get lots of targets again. So he's, as you mentioned, a must start. And I'm worried about Laporta. The Packers just generally forget about covering tight ends for long stretches of games. Wouldn't be surprised if Laporta has a good game with Jamison Williams out. They did seem to make more of an effort to get him involved with Williams sideline. So that all being said, I also don't think you sit Evan Engram given this situation in Jacksonville.
Yeah. Also, to be clear, you're worried about Laporta because you're a Packers fan.
Yes. No, I'm like, as a Packer fan, worried about getting killed by Laporta.
Yep. All right. Let's get into the Q&A. A bunch of questions. We won't be able to get to them all, but we'll get to what we can. We'll start off with this super chat from KV Benjamin. It's a deep one, but we'll try to be quick. It's a 10-team half PPR, decent record. Looking for trade opportunities. Here are the names: Kyler Murray, Kirk Cousins, Baker Mayfield, a quarterback. I can tell you right off the bat, I would be looking to trade one of Murray or Mayfield because they're both very, very good quarterbacks that you should be able to get something for. And unless this is a super flex, if you can get package one of them with a receiver or running back to upgrade that position, I would not want to carry 3 quarterbacks. So I'll throw that out at the gate. Breece Hall, David Montgomery, Brian Robinson Jr., Bucky, Irving, Rico, Dowdle. This is a good roster. And then Drake London, Chris Olave, Devontae Smith, Tank Dell, Keon Coleman, Jacoby Myers, and Cedric Tillman. A lot of good players. My main takeaway would be packaging one of those quarterbacks with one of these lower, like a Dowdle or a Dell or a Myers, to try to upgrade one of those positions to get more of a starter. With a chance to read through these, John, do you have a general idea of any thoughts or moves?
Yeah, I would agree. Like you'd want to take one of these you'd look for a team that has a quarterback problem, and you look and see if there's a player that you want on, as an upgrade at running back or receiver, and then you offer them. I would go with Mayfield, just given the Chris Godwin injury and the Mike Evans injury. I probably would be looking to move him, but maybe they're not interested in that. I think Murray would be fine as well. And then package it 2 for 1 and try to get a every week starter for you, because right now at running back, you've got Hall, and then Monty's kind of fading a little bit with Gibbs coming on. Brian Robinson is part of a committee, but has been good in spots, but also dinged up constantly. I probably would be looking at running back because your receivers are really strong. And then I would just say, if you want to trade for Josh Downs, that's not a bad idea either, just because he's rest of the season probably undervalued.
Very cool.
But you've got so many good receivers right now. I probably would trade like a Coleman for Downs too, just to see if they would fight on that.
I would make that a trade in a heartbeat. Love that call. All right. Senor Rojo with a what I think is one of the more interesting questions of at least of the waiver wire mess, or in this case, positive. Jawan Jennings or Cedric Tillman, rest of season in PPR. This is particularly interesting, I think, because we've talked about both these guys, John. Both waiver wire pickups who have shown very high upside when given the opportunity. They should both have some opportunity rest of season. Jennings or Tillman, what's your take in PPR?
Well, I'll tell you an embarrassing fab story where I spent way too much fab, as it's happened to all of us. But in my longtime keeper league, PPR, Jawan Jennings was out there, and I was like, oh, like he's a good rest of season ad coming out of this bye. I'm pretty stacked at receiver, so I didn't really need him, but I was like, I'm sitting on $77 out of my 100. And I'm like, I can't take this with me. I don't like having all the fab because it constantly gives me these decisions as to how much I want to put on somebody. So I like burning it early on players. If there's a player I like, I really want to grab, I just burn it. And then I just go with $0 bids the rest of the way. So I looked at the Reddit NAR FFL waiver report that said that Juwan Jennings was about $29 last week, 29%. So I was thinking, okay, I'll do like 37. And I'm like, these guys always outbid me for a player like this. So I went up to 57, and not a single other person bid on him.
Wow.
I just wanted to share that story because it was embarrassing, and it happens to all of us. But I got Jennings, so I'm happy. It's better than having 57 fab, in my opinion.
True.
I've got him as we're assuming right now that he's coming back this week. He's not healthy right now, we know. So I've got him at wide receiver 43. Tillman, I have higher at 38 because he is healthy. And I think if you would have asked me this heading into last week, I might have had Tillman slightly below Jennings. But then Tillman obviously exploded with Jameis Winston last week with the 2 touchdowns. I picked him up in Scott Fish and also in this league I just was discussing. So I'm happy to have him rest of season as well, but I would lean his way right now with Jennings. If you're just kind of looking at that, we didn't get into it a lot, but the 49ers offense, McCaffrey coming back, and then you've got Debo, you've got Kittle playing at a really high level. Jennings should be a good fantasy option. And with Ayuk completely out of the way, he should be the 3rd or 4th option, but he might be 1st or 2nd in any given week. So, I'm looking forward to that. But Tillman, obviously, last 2 weeks has been outstanding and looks like he's a rising star there in Cleveland.
Big agree. Very briefly, I saw this question. I just wanted to quickly hit it. Dave Eric says, can I play Denver's D at Baltimore? Has a streamer defense and kicker conundrum. I just wanted to hop in quickly say, no. You cannot play any defense against Baltimore. They are number 1 against fantasy defenses. Find something else, whatever it is. That's my take. But a more general question. Dane Campbell says, would you trade Alexander Mattison and J.K. Dobbins? Madison is the locked and loaded rest of season starter, by the way. There was some reports this past week. And J.K. Dobbins for Chris Olave and T.J. Hockenson, PPR, or Amon-Ra for Brian Thomas Jr. and Marvin Harrison Jr. Wow. 2 trade options here, both of which are pretty big.
And I would say it depends with the Denver question. It really depends on who you have to cut.
True.
Because
don't cut Tyrone Tracy Jr. if that's what you're
right.
talking about.
So and you don't really want to cut the Denver defense. They've been like number 1, number 2 this year. So I think you can roll them out there. You just have to expect you're not going to get much out of them that week. If you
can find someone to cut, do it. But yes, to your point,
it just depends on who that person is. If it's a goofball, then you're okay. But this is why he's asking the question: is that he doesn't know who he can cut. These trades: Madison RB3 type, Dobbins RB2 type. Olave looks like the arrow maybe pointing up rest of season. I haven't been that big on him because he, was competing with King Rashid Shaheed. And but now that he's out of the way and Carr is back, it's definitely a rising star there. And then Hockenson, if you need a tight end, certainly, but you're taking a hit at running back. So if you can handle it, that's fine. But I think it's a fair trade. It's kind of Dobbins for Olave and then Madison for Hockenson, which I would say is probably in favor of the Olave Hockenson, as long as you can absorb that hit at running back. And then this is a separate trade. I don't know how you feel about this 2-for-1 with Thomas and Marvin. I probably would do this with these 2 rookies playing as well as they are. I mean, Marvin's been a little spotty. I normally don't like the 2-for-1s being on the other end of it and not getting the best player, but Brian Thomas has actually been better than Amon-Ra St. Brown.
Yeah.
So you can make that case.
Yeah, I think that the health thing was a question for Brian Thomas Jr., but in 1 week being a potential play, game time decision, but still potential play, I think the concern is lower there. I think you make this move. I think you make both these moves. Obviously, the Madison Dobbins one is very positionally dependent. You have to have the running back depth, as you mentioned, but I like the other side in a vacuum. So if you can handle a position move there, I would do it. And then on this wide receiver one, I think you get 2 strong starters for 1 strong starter, and that's a trade that I'd make. So I like both. Good calls. Tom Sturdivant says, John, I see you have Tucker Kraft as tight end 8 rest of the season in half PPR. How are you thinking about his target share and production amongst the wide receivers? Good question.
Tom is a Twitter friend, a longtime subscriber. Hello to Tom. He's got I believe he lives in the Carolinas, and hope he was safe during that whole hurricane, and he's got a Packer, I believe, man cave, he sent me a picture of it. It was pretty sick. I think Tucker Kraft is really good. Watching him play, I think he is a tight end 1 rest of season. He is not a high volume guy, but they seem to find him for a big play every week, and they definitely look for him in the red zone. He's good with the yak, so he can catch and then break a tackle and get in the end zone. I saw him against the Rams. He had this long ass run down the sideline where he showed a lot of athleticism for the touchdown, and then later in the game they went to him. I don't know, it was like the 12-15 yard line. He caught the ball at the 6 or 7, broke a tackle, and got in the end zone. So they'd like to draw attention to all these receivers and then feed it to him in the red zone. I think I've got him in this aforementioned league where I picked up Jawan Jennings. Him and Mark Andrews are my 2 tight ends, and I've been starting Kraft. And I think with Love, if Love is healthy, then this passing game is strong enough to support him certainly at the position. I think that it's tougher with the receivers because you get, Jaden Reed, who started really hot, has been a little bit quiet, but I still think he's their number 1 receiver. And then after that, it's kind of chaos. Dobbs has been playing well, so he's kind of the number 2. And then it depends on the week whether or not it's going to be Watson or Dontavian Wicks. So that's where it gets dicey. But I think Kraft has been a pretty consistent 4 to 5 to 6 target guy, and high scoring opportunity for him.
Yep, I agree. We'll go one more. I briefly will say, somebody asked in chat, what's going on with DK Metcalf? Is he practicing? He has not practiced. He has a knee injury. His return is a little bit cloudy. That's a direct quote from Mike McDonald. So that's something that's going to really depend on the Friday injury report. Keep your eyes out for that. But just wanted to briefly throw that in from that question in chat. Thanks for bringing that up. We'll end with this one. I know there are a million questions we couldn't get to. So much stuff to talk about. As always, hop into the Discord for the AMA with John. You can get lots of questions answered that way, or hit us up on Twitter. Thanks a ton for all the questions. Mac fam, stash priority question, rest of season. This feels like a very valid and useful one heading towards the playoffs. Kimani Vidal, Blake Corum, Jalen Wright, Ray Davis, Isaac Guerrero, to name a few. Obviously, if you have any others that pop into your head, John, that would even go above these guys, those ones as well. But do you have favorites from this list or any others?
Yeah. So your approach on this, or at least what I would recommend your approach be, is you want to be stashing guys that are talented, 1 injury away from a huge role or very big role. So who qualifies in this list? I think Vidal probably qualifies, but I would definitely say Corum and Ray Davis qualify, because if anything were to happen to Kyron Williams, Corum has moved into the RB2 role for the Rams already, and I think he'd be the guy that sees the 15 to 20 touches in a good rushing attack. We saw what Ray Davis can do with James Cook out. And also great offense, great rushing attack. And then Vidal probably would be 3rd on this list. Jalen Wright, sure, but he's the 3rd running back there. So if something were to happen to Achane, then Mostert probably gets back into his 12 to 17 touch role with Wright as the backup. I don't think he necessarily takes over the whole Achane role. That would be surprising to me. And then Guerrero, he's the RB3 when Mason is healthy, and we have McCaffrey, we think, coming back after the bye. So he would not qualify for that. So those are the questions. Talented and 1 injury away from a big role. Those are the types of guys you want to stash, because they're the clearest ones that you can plug right in once there's an injury.
Just 1 or 2 other names I'll throw out there. These are all pretty deep names, but I'll just throw these out there in case you have a very deep bench or something and you can stash some more guys away. Kendre Miller. These are guys specifically that I take John's criteria, which are good ones, and then look at the running back ahead of them and think, what are the chances that they might actually get injured? Kendre Miller behind an Alvin Kamara who's obviously older and has been injured. Now, that one is worth noting. Kendre Miller is currently dealing with an injury, as he apparently always is. So you're not necessarily running to pick him up, but just a player to keep an eye on. And then this one is, I think, very deep, but Trey Benson is kind of interesting to me as a stash. James Conner never, ever plays a full season, and he has done so far. I personally hope he continues to do so because I love James Conner. But if he were to miss a couple games down the stretch, Trey Benson had one game that he got 11 carries and rushed for only 10 yards. And that game has single-handedly ruined his yards per carry. But in every other game this season, he's had 4+ yards per carry and has looked pretty explosive. And that's a very good offense that runs through basically one running back. So if Conner were to go down, Benson would be interesting, I think.
May I respond to that?
Yes.
I would counter that and say Amari DiMercato is probably the sneaky play there. Benson, he's got the draft capital, but if you look at DiMercato, he has been playing ahead of Benson most of the year. So I think he is currently the RB2 there. He does have a good passing role, or at least he's, they have him catching some passes here and there. And then last year and this year, I don't know about this year if I haven't checked, but a couple weeks ago when I checked, he had a really high rushing grade at PFF. Last year, he was in the top 5 in PFF rushing grade. So DiMercato to me is the one that you might want to. I don't want to start a fight with you on this, Matt, but that's how it is with this game. Is that how do we parse this out? I mean, probably what we see. I don't think we see Benson in a 20 touch role DiMercato not doing anything if Conner were to sit out, and I don't necessarily think we'll see DiMercato in the 20 touch role with Benson doing nothing. It's probably like who's going to be the lead back, and my guess right now would be DiMercato. But I have a few other names to throw out there. Jalen Warren, obviously. Zach Charbonnet has already done it if he's sitting on the waiver wire. Tyler Algier, Braylon Allen. We mentioned Bray Davis and Blake Corum, Tyjae Spears. One that I've seen on the waiver wire is Roshan Johnson. Khalil Herbert has basically disappeared. He's been inactive. It's clear that Roshan Johnson is the backup to DeAndre Swift, and that running game has gotten a lot better. So he's one to sort of stash. Looks like he's pretty talented. Ty Chandler, Antonio Gibson. We saw him in the lead role. It didn't go great this year, so maybe the shine is off that one a little bit. I've got DiMercato below Benson. I'm going to change that right now and fix that. So DiMercato, no, I caught myself there. And then I think that's probably, I don't know if that's it for probably is. I'm looking down the list of the guys that really.
Who would be your guy for Green Bay?
Well, right now it's Emmanuel Wilson. That's actually a good question. Emmanuel Wilson is one that's healthy. Marshawn Lloyd has, we thought heading into the season, right? He's just been injured this entire time. So right now it's Emmanuel Wilson.
Okay.
That was a good discussion.
All right.
This is a good podcast. Very interesting, informative podcast we run here. It's a tight ship.
The best. I think we decided last week it's the best podcast. This is it's factual.
Definitely the most accurate.
Yes, correct. All right. Thank you for the question, Mac fam. Really good stuff there. And just for everybody else's headspace, this is the kind of thing and the kind of moves that you can make that can win you fantasy leagues. If you are holding on to a wide receiver 5 on your bench that you're never going to play, and you can replace them with one of these running backs who could end up being a league winner down the stretch, that is a huge move to make. So good question from Mac fam. Go grab the guys we just named, one of them, take your favorite, or take John's favorite, or take Trey Benson. We'll finish it there. Thank you all for being here. Tons of good stuff today and this week. AMA with John in the Discord. If you've got access to that, try to get access to it. If you don't, that's this afternoon. And enjoy your week 9. We will see you after that. Adios.